right, welcome back to the Evangelical Anglican. A little different this time. Instead of just me, I've decided to bring on a friend. We're going to kind of start doing these from time to time and just have a conversation about evangelicalism, Anglicanism, everything in between, or everything outside of that. Really, anything at all. I've got my good friend Jonathan McKenzie on here. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Jonathan is evangelical, but is not Anglican.
Oh,
Um,
this is true.
and I thought it could be no better way to start the Evangelical Anglican interview series than to talk to somebody who's not actually Anglican, um, but has flirted a little bit with Anglicanism in the past.
hmm
You almost Anglicanism could be like an ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, we dated, I'd say. We
Yeah, you
dated.
dated,
Yeah.
but you ultimately decided to marry the PCA.
Yeah, I guess it's more like a prolonged crush because I can count, I think there was 4 months where I was actually at an Episcopal church, and then I can continue to flirt with wanting to be Anglican, and then I finally had the opportunity, and then I got cold feet, and
Yeah.
I chickened out and stayed in the PCA world. So
Well, really, you found out that she had really bad parents,
yeah,
and it was not going to be a great fit. But then
yeah,
there's some things that you still you compare your current wife, the PCA,
right.
to that former girlfriend.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, the analogy is breaking down. Hey, so tell me a little bit tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about yourself, your history, kind of you where you grew up,
hmm
how you grew up with church, your story.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I grew up in a pastor's home in kind of the Venn diagram meeting between the SBC, the Southern Baptist world, and kind of the MacArthurite Bible Church world. So growing up, our church was an SBC church, but my dad kind of ran in a lot of Southern Baptist, but also kind of MacArthurite circles. So I was Calvinist, I was dispensationalist. Those are kind of the two big things. Although I'd say that the dispensationalist thing was always kind of more in the background. Um, and then by the time I got to high school, I was kind of uh, got into the whole reformed podcasting world and articles and all the things that you had access to with free reign to the internet. At that age,
Hmm.
and kind of read myself into a more classical Protestant. So went into dispensationalist, became Paedo Baptist. Really thought I wanted to be Presbyterian. And then by the end of high school, um, I kind of read my way into some more high church reform things. So I really like the idea of Anglicanism or some form of like maybe CREC, Federal Vision, sorts of Presbyterianism. And then I got to school. I went to Reformation Bible College in Sanford, Florida, which isn't
Hmm.
too far from your stomping grounds now.
No.
Um, and in there, I kind of branded myself as the Anglican, but I was like, oh, there's no Anglican churches around here, right? So I went to a very Anglicanish Presbyterian church there in Orlando for a bit. And then I heard that the Episcopal diocese there was actually pretty conservative. Um, and so I ended up spending kind of a year stint. It was kind of over COVID, so I had some interruptions um, at an unnamed a cathedral church that I had a good time at. Ended up being briefly on staff at the Cathedral Church of St. Luke, which I had a good time on. I just kind of realized that 4 months in, um, that I just, it's not you, it's me.
Hmm.
And, I was 19 and still figuring things out, and I just didn't think the Episcopal Church was a good fit for me. So that was a good 4 months of ministry, and I had a good time there. It was good, great people. But I still wanted to be Anglican. And we could talk maybe more about some of those reasons. Throughout the entirety of my rest of my undergrad, I went to another Presbyterian church, the PCA, got involved, had a great time, made good relationships. And then after college, I moved to South Carolina to do a kind of sort of internship for an organization called the Davenant Institute for a year. And I kind of chose it because they had a cool Anglican, studies thing you could do, and they were
Yeah.
publishing all the cool Reformed Anglican stuff. It was always like a more ecumenical kind of organization, but it was a clear, Anglican emphasis. When you went to their conferences, it was 1662 morning, evening prayer, which was what the sort of thing I was into. And then I got there, and I visited an REC church a few times, and I kind of just realized, man, I'm really gonna miss the PCA. Um, and kind of reevaluated for me what was important. And even though I really love the prayer book tradition, I still go to like the Prayer Book Society conference every once in a while up in Savannah. Um, and love.
Do you wear a bow tie to it?
No, I don't wear bow ties. I'm not
Do
a
you
bow
try to
tie
do
guy.
anything to tell everyone that you're a Presbyterian?
No, I wore a red tweed jacket, last time.
Yeah,
Um, which they're all red, so it goes with it. But
yeah, that's enough.
um, I just kind of realized I'm like a big church discipline sort of guy. So I'm Reformed, Calvinistic, and I'm not like a big Jure Divino Episcopacy guy. So it just made more sense for me to stay in the PCA. Um, but I love the English Reformed tradition. I love, Richard Hooker is one of my heroes. Cranmer's a hero. We're
Yes.
actually Ridley and Latimer more the hero. Cranmer wrote the book, but and they didn't waffle. So I
Right.
like them a bit more. But yeah, it's kind of where I've landed. So now I tell my Presbyterian friends still like to call me the Anglican, but it's like, guys, I'm an employed Presbyterian now, right? I'm a youth director here at Christ Church Presbyterian in Augusta now, and I'm really enjoying it. But that's me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, people. That's funny because people always accuse me of being Presbyterian, and I'm like, I'm literally an Episcopal priest. I couldn't be less Presbyterian. So you grew up Southern Baptist,
hmm
dispensational, and you
Yep.
said that in high school you were just reading a lot.
More
Um,
listening. I'm not. I wasn't that
to
disciplined.
like the
Yeah.
okay, so the
Yeah.
podcast world.
Yeah.
Um, why were you not a normal high schooler?
I think it's because I was a pastor's kid. I was a
Okay.
pastor's kid. And I had this weird moment when I turned 13 where I was like, oh, I'm a man now. I have to like think things, right?
Yeah.
And where I kind of felt like it was my personal responsibility to like study theology and study Bible for myself. I don't know, it was like a weird thing that kind of turned on that day. I mean, that's really, I really started getting invested, in reading articles, I wasn't reading books, really,
Right.
and listening to things. But I think
Did you
partly it's,
feel? Go ahead.
I think partly it's because of my dad's influence. I mean, he was a pastor, and he was a pastor that really took studying seriously.
Yeah.
So
Did you feel like there was a separation between you and some of your friends or peers at school, like where you were just interested in different stuff than they were?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was at a Christian school in for middle school, and I was always kind of like, oh, if you have like a Bible question, you go to Jonathan about it.
Yeah.
And then in my public high school, yeah, there wasn't a strong Christian presence, I think, and so but I was less known. I was more known for like that's the really Christian guy than like, oh,
Yeah.
he like reads and listens to things.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So what was it? So your dad was kind of the more the Baptist Calvinistic
hmm
tradition.
Yeah.
So what were those conversations like when you were starting to lean away from, still in the Calvinistic tradition, but
Yeah.
away from the Baptist?
So, I mean, I had kind of like dropped dispensationalism by like the end of eighth grade because I don't know, I was
Did you
weird and I was like,
leave it
I don't,
behind?
I left it behind. Well, I was an avid reader of the Left Behind kids series, which is its
Yeah, dude.
own
Oh, yeah.
series, which I enjoyed. I had a good time. I ended up not finishing it.
The Left
Uh,
Behind Kids series, a slightly less terrifying, you
yeah,
know.
dude, I don't know, man. There's people falling through, getting like pulls through their, body and their earthquake, the
Golly.
Wrath of the Lamb. It was still pretty intense. Um, and that didn't really trigger my dad a lot because that was just more of like a thing. But I think the Baptist part was kind of a big deal. So sophomore year of high school was kind of when I was like, okay, I'm a Paedo Baptist, want to be Presbyterian now. But I was like, I really need to sit on this before I talk to my dad about it. So I
Mm,
waited almost a year and like was like working on like my argument and writing up my thing, and trying to make my case because I knew if I went to him, he would say, "No, where's the receipts? You gotta show it to
yeah,
me."
yeah,
And then one day, my junior year of high school, I was like, "Okay, I gotta go come out to my dad." So I
yeah,
went to his office, sat down, and he was like, "I have something to talk to you about." And I kind of came out, of my Paedo Baptist closet, and And it was great. It was a great conversation, because I mean, he disagreed. He and I had like a pretty lively discussion about it, not
Yeah,
malicious, but like,
right.
here's the points, here's his points, and then we got to talk about it. And I think that's actually um, that's like really where my friendship with my dad started. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where that was like my wrestling the old man kind of moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our relationship became more transparent and just got better after that. We had always had a good relationship, but um, yeah, I think that's where you know the peer, I mean, kind of the adult relationship with my dad began, and it was a really beautiful thing.
Yeah,
And
you kind of met him as a man.
yeah, and my dad's an ecumenical guy. I mean, he's had Presbyterian friends, and so it doesn't,
One or two.
yeah, one or two, you
Yeah.
gotta have your tokens.
Right. Right.
So he wasn't like particularly triggered, he disagreed pretty strongly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's where it
That's
happened.
that's really funny to, you know, I'm just picturing you sitting down your dad, be like, Dad, I have something really difficult to share with you that I haven't shared, and I've been wondering how to share it. And he's like, Oh my gosh, what is it? And you're like, I'm a Beta Baptist. He's like, okay, well, we can deal with that.
Could be worse, yeah.
Uh, yeah. And that was probably around the time when Gospel Coalition, and there's a lot of conversation between Baptists and
Yep.
Presbyterians, kind of the broader Catholic tradition.
Yeah.
Um, I want to get back to your story, but outside of your story, just in general, one question I've always been thinking about a lot. What do you think is the reason why there's so much? Um, well, let me put it like this: when I look at church history, I think that there's a lot closer familial relationship between Anglicans and Presbyterians than Presbyterians and Baptists.
Mhm.
But in the modern kind of broad evangelical world, Presbyterians and Baptists are like best friends,
Mhm.
and Anglicans are kind of the the third rail. There's a couple that we like. John
Mhm.
Stott,
Of course.
Presbyterians really like John Stott. Presbyterians used to like N.T. Wright, a couple of them, and then they all left the PCA, or whatever. Um, uh, J.I. Packer,
Mhm.
some of C.S. Lewis. But there doesn't seem to be as much of a. Um, it's weirder to people if I was in the PCA, which I was at one point, and I told my pastor, "Hey, I'm Credo Baptist. I'm going to go Reformed Baptist." It would be a much different conversation
Yeah.
than me wanting to be an Anglican,
Mhm.
which my pastor handled it fine, but it was just a very different conversation. What do you think is the reason, or that you notice maybe could be
Yeah.
reasons behind that?
Well, this is something that really frustrated me in my undergrad. Where I want to say firstly, I love my school. I loved my education. I had a good time, but I was always really confused about why Ligonier, for example, is just such a good example of this, right? Like Ligonier is like very explicitly you're Presbyterian or you're Baptist.
Yeah,
That's Ligonier Ministries, right?
yeah,
I think early on they had some Lutherans around, but after the whole Evangelicals and Catholics together, that kind of went away. Um, and I think part of it is I don't know if you've ever seen the meme, like Elon Musk likes to post this where it's like the political spectrum and it's like, Elon's here and then like it shifts and like all of a sudden he's right wing now when he used to be left wing.
right.
I think that's kind of what happened with
The Overton window.
yeah, I think that's kind of what happened with Presbyterianism um and Anglicanism because in some sense if you had kind of a political spectrum and in the middle, is like a cutoff and one side's uh consciously Protestant, consciously semi-evangelical. Their side is not that. Um, Over the course of like 1830 to like 1970, the Anglican side kept on kind of drifting over until they kind of mostly crossed the line. And the Presbyterian side probably drifted a little bit the other way, right?
Mm,
So we're to where now, like temperamentally and culturally, Presbyterians just are more similar to Baptists,
right.
right? Whereas historically, that's not the case. And if you read, like I've been reading a lot of like American Presbyterian stuff for the first time, like the way they talk, like they see each other as like the co-main characters in the American story, right? Like that aren't Methodist, right? You have this
Right.
massive Methodists make up most of the population, and then you have the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians, and they write about each other all the time.
Yeah.
And and when they write about each other, they're always like, "Oh yeah, I know we agree on predestination, we agree on justification, we agree on paedobaptism, and da 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 da." Oh, but that church government they have over there, oh that worship they have over there, right?
Right.
And so there is kind of like I think a very brotherly relationship, especially in the American context, where they kind of have to live next to each other. Um,
Mm.
and I think it's a kind
Mm.
of a uniquely American phenomenon. Whereas if you cross the ocean, right, the Presbyterians live up north and the Anglicans live down south, and they kind of have like this national feud. Like the Scottish Presbyterians never really liked the Anglicans, right? It's just
Right.
kind of the fact. Um, and so I think part of it is really one, just I think the traditions have moved apart from each other. I think Anglicanism, I mean, you've talked about this, right, has become unrecognizable, right, from what it would have been for most of its history,
Yeah.
um, and that's part of it. And then I think the 20th century with kind of the fundamentalist modernist controversies, right, like when R.C. Sproul, which I think matters a lot in this story, when he's looking for friends to have to help argue for things like inerrancy, and social issues, he more quickly found them amongst Baptists, which surprised him if you hear his rendition of the story.
Mm.
And so, I think a lot of the modern kind of Presbyterian Baptist coalition is because of Sproul and his own relationships with someone like MacArthur, etc.
Yeah.
Um, kind of brings that together. And then I think the decline of Calvinism in America made it to where the Presbyterians were simply happy to find somebody else that was a Calvinist. Whereas
Right.
historically, that would have just been like the dominant, outside of
Right.
Methodism, would have been the
Right.
dominant sort of disposition. So I think those
Right.
kind of factors, yeah,
Yeah, and that coinciding when almost all Anglicans would have identified themselves as anything but Calvinists.
right,
You know, until you kind of have the Reformation Anglicanism kind of resurgence that's happening. It's been happening probably the last 10, 15 years.
right.
Um, yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, what ways do you see uh, Baptists and I have no we're not a negative
Right.
podcast about Baptists. I grew up Baptist, love Baptist. Um, what ways do you see kind of Baptist uh, approach to ministry rubbing off on Presbyterianism in ways that Anglicanism should have rubbed off on? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I might get in trouble for saying this. I
Well,
think,
don't say anything you'll get in trouble for saying.
well, no. I think something like the idea of like this high emphasis on every member ministry.
Mm.
Um, and so the distinction between what the pastor does and what the lay people do, there is a pretty strong distinction between kind of those two estates, if you will, in Presbyterian history. Um, and 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 I think that rubs off in Presbyterians in a certain way of how they set up and their ministry and understand what it is the pastor does, how that relates to the sacraments, how that relates to the preaching of the word. I think that's one example. Um, and then another example, I think, um, does come out in the way they understand government too. I think, the fact that a lot of Presbyterians kind of think the way church government works is like the local church is the basis and then it builds up from there. Where historic
Right,
Presbyterianism says actually it's the presbytery and that goes up
right,
and that goes down, right?
right.
And so I think there's kind of this very decentralized, anti-hierarchical nature to modern Presbyterianism that I think is foreign to it. And I think that's an area where historically, like Episcopalians and Presbyterians kind of agreed, oh yeah, like there's a hierarchical nature to the church. Um, and even like, for example, like the distinction between like a pastor and a ruling elder. So if you go back to like the old PCUSA 1789 Constitution, it says the pastor, which also calls the bishop, his office is first in dignity for its usefulness, right?
Mhm.
And so there's a kind of understanding that there is like the pastor is the first among um, equals in the sense of rule, but not equals in the sense of function. I
Yeah.
think I don't know if those are very concrete ways, but I think there's just certain ways where Presbyterianism's kind of gone more Baptist in its ecclesiology, which affects things like worship and ministry models and that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
It's funny you said that every member a minister, because that's one of like the liturgical renewal and tech, the Episcopal Church, like the
Yeah.
1979 prayer book. Really, that was like one of the things that they
Hmm.
held up as this like strength.
Right.
Look, we brought back the laity as
Hmm.
one of the four offices of ministry, or some stupid thing,
Right.
where and I'm not saying, of course, as lay Christians we have responsibilities,
Right.
and um, it's just overcomplicating. It's idea creep of a word, like,
Right.
to where you're like, well, every member. It's like this whole kind of, who's the minister? Well, every member's a minister. It's like, okay,
Right.
well, what do I need to call them to get you to answer the question that I'm asking?
Yeah.
Who is your actual minister? It's like,
Right.
oh, it's him, or it's
Hmm.
her. It's him. It's like we just make things more complicated to try to deal with this issue of clericalism,
Hmm.
of like, well, we don't like this idea that it's just the minister
Right.
doing things. We want the whole congregation involved.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing is that hasn't helped clericalism at all. I think that there's still a ton of clericalism in Anglicanism.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think it's also led to making a law when there is no law on the people and their duties. Like I think it adds responsibilities on their plate, which aren't necessarily like their own personal responsibilities, right?
hmm,
Um, like I just like I listen to some churches that kind of have this every member ministry model, and it just sounds like an exhausting thing when you sit in a membership class. And it's like, as
yeah,
a member, here are all of your extra responsibilities to do the work of ministry, right?
right,
And
right,
it all relies on like this, exegetical case from Ephesians 4. Is it, equipping the saints for the work of ministry, or is it the work of
right.
ministry and equipping the saints? And however you read that, I mean, I'm not a Greek scholar, so I'll let them sort it out. Um, but it kind of creates this category of like super Christian, and I think you see this on like a lot of people that I know that have like left certain PCA churches and ended up in Anglican churches or tech churches or other worlds. Is they like, yeah, man, like I came here because it's just like so restful after what
Yeah,
was expected of me, um,
right,
in my every member ministry model church, right?
right.
And I'm not talking about like love your neighbor as yourself, tithe, Christian duties. It's adding on
Sure.
pastor's job to the people, and it sounds empowering, but I think it's really like can be kind of degrading and guilt tripping, when done improperly. I bet there's people that do it healthily and there's ways to do it, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
totally think I think that's totally true. I think non-denoms also get uh, good non-denoms can do it really well, um, but non-denoms tend to. I mean, let's just say churches today. There's a need for volunteers because there's a need for programs, or at least there's a perceived need for programs. You could
Right.
argue whether or not they're actually all that needed, but there's a perceived need for programs. And so to get programs to run, you have to get volunteers.
Hmm.
And then to get volunteers, so really, it's almost like people exist to feed these churches rather than churches exist to feed people,
Right.
right? Like you exist to be into our program so that we can build the program and we can get more people into the program, and so that the machine, like, more coal into the fire to keep the engine going. Um, and then people come to some of these older, more traditional, more I mean, you might argue more theologically informed, on how ministry ought to be done. um, and I think they do experience a lot of rest and a lot of like, okay, this is nice, I can just breathe for a little bit. And
Yeah.
then the other challenge is growing churches in the modern kind of the world that we live in,
Hmm.
um, and growing them in a healthy way, in a vibrant way, but in a way that gives life, you do have to have programs. Or again, there's perceived need for programs, and how do you do that without becoming the machine that just exists to feed itself, but actually exists to help other people?
Yeah. I think there's this kind of shared sense of the ordinary. I think that old Presbyterianism and old Anglicanism have,
Hmm.
where like they don't need everything to be radical, right? And
Right.
I think that's what people find refreshing is I can just kind of come and be like a normal person that goes to church, invest in the church, makes relationships, but it kind of sanctifies the ordinary mode of life. And I think a lot of some of this, I think maybe old Baptists have this too, but I think a lot of modern Baptists, modern non-denom, it's everything has to be radical. Everything kind of has to be like subversive to the natural order of things, right?
Hmm.
Um, which is why it's so unrestful because you naturally just want to go to with a natural order of the way the world works. You just want to have a job and love your kids and be a good family member and work and die as a faithful Christian. You don't need to be radical, you know.
Right.
Um, and I think that's partly what people find so arresting too, you
Yeah.
know.
All right. So, and back with your story. So you're a Gen Z guy. You're getting into the online podcasting world, the reformed world. Now, how did you go into the online theological arena and not end up Eastern Orthodox or Roman Catholic? I mean, that's all I hear
Yeah.
these days is that if you go online and you're, an 18, 19, 20-year old, you're going to end up Eastern Orthodox.
Right, right. Well, they got the better memes, you know.
Did
Yeah, I think
you ever flirt with any of them?
no, not really. Um, and sometimes I kind of miss the curve. So I'm like I don't know, Gen Z ends in 2010 and begins in 1997, and I'm a 2000 baby. So I'm kind of an older Gen Z.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could find Catholic apologetic stuff online, but I just always had this anti-papist bone in my body where
Yeah.
it was never going to happen. And so, like, the reform stuff was the main game in town when I got into it. Um, but yeah, so it was never like
But you
attracted.
had friends that,
Yeah, yeah, I had friends that became Catholic, and in some ways, it's interesting because a lot of that for my initial friend group wasn't primarily because of the online presence, but because they were just reading a whole lot of Thomas Aquinas over COVID by themselves and were convinced of like arguments. It was kind of they kind of I
mm,
guess they converted a bit more virtuously, right? Um, and now they participate in the online. One of my good friends is Christian Wagner, and he has a very big online Catholic apologetics presence. Um, you know,
yeah.
so but I think for a lot of young people, they're dissatisfied with what's on offer with a lot of the non-denom evangelical world they grow up in because it doesn't feel vital. It feels very stale. You can get excited with Hillsong, right? And I think what most of them do, if you're going to leave that world, I think most of them are ending up. We talk a lot about Eastern Orthodox and Catholicism. I think a lot more of them are ending up in more extreme charismatic world than they are in like
Hmm.
Catholicism. Because I think what Catholicism and Orthodoxy and extreme charismaticism they all offer a very similar thing, which is a sort of experience of something that's bigger than you, something that doesn't that feels radically um, uh, uh, what's the term? Uh, Against the tide of modernity, against the tide of uh, where things are going. So with like extreme charismaticism, it's yes, there's spirits and there's demons out there, and they're running at all these things, and we need these extreme manifestations of the spirit to fight against this, and we need to get back to biblical times and have these sorts of things, and you can kind
Mm,
of have this vital, real experience, right? Um, and in some
hmm.
sense, that is radical, but not in the same like kind of faux like whatever David Platt sort of way, right?
Yeah.
And I think what Orthodoxy and Catholicism seem to offer is something like that. Like you get to walk into church and you have this ritual experience that involves your eyes and your ears, your nose and your mouth, that connects you with this bigger divine thing, right? And both of them are similarly focused on the passions and on the body, and kind of give you epistemic certainty. Because with charismaticism, it's like, oh yes, I can talk to God and hear from Him now, and have a living magisterium in a way. Catholicism, you kind of have this sort of very you have this foundation. You feel like you can kind of rest your brain. You don't have to think too hard anymore because now you're in. It's all okay. It all works
Yeah.
out. And the same thing with orthodoxy. Um, and and I think with I don't know if this is where you're going, but I guess I'll keep on talking if that's okay.
Yeah.
um, I think with the Orthodoxy and Catholicism thing, the reason why it's like a really good sell is because they are forms of religion that connect you not only to spiritual things but also connect you to history. That's really cool, and not history just in the sense of like what the church has always believed. It connects you civilizationally to Eastern or Western forms of Christendom, right? So you kind of have this it upholds civilization. So when you feel like your belief is falling apart and civilization's falling apart, it's great they can go grab these kind of really rich intellectual traditions and say we have the answers to what we are supposed to believe, how we're supposed to worship, and how civilization needs to go. And so when you're a Gen Z person, especially one that was in high school or middle school during COVID, when it felt like the world changed, you can't trust anybody anymore. You can't trust your government to tell you the truth. You can't, trust your pastor to not, you know, preach about, I don't know, I don't get into politics, right? But,
Yeah. No.
more far lefty sorts of things in a comparatively conservative pulpit, right?
Right.
And it's like this, it's debilitating, right? So where you have this thing on offer that can answer all of your questions, and it seems like a good sell. Like this is the propaganda is really good. It's like this is what the church has always believed. This is how we've always worshipped, right? Um, and I think that's just like, man, that's what a lot of people want, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
Would you
yeah.
say that from your vantage point, um, a lot of the Gen Z guys who've gotten really interested in, the charismatic world,
Hmm.
Roman Catholic, um, or Eastern Orthodox, formerly evangelical,
Right.
broadly reformed kind of thing. Are you kind of saying that what you've noticed is that there's a feeling of betrayal in their leaders, of like they let me down?
I think there's a part of that. Yeah. I mean, I think there's kind of this feeling that you've been lied to, right?
Mm.
So whether it's like doctrine, like that's something I kind of felt like when I came to classical Protestantism and church history, it's like, oh no, all of this has been kept from me, right?
Mm.
Um, and I've been kept from the great tradition, whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of feels like you've you've not been let in on the deeper truth and the deeper secret, and that's due to failure from either your pastor or your tradition. And then civilizationally, it's from the government, right? Like this evil modern government, right? That's run
Right.
by whatever you want to put behind the who runs the
Right.
thing, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah, it depends who you ask for some Gen Z people, right? Um,
Right.
and there's open to any alternative, right? Which is why, like, if you look at like Holocaust denial by generation, what generation is most likely to be a Holocaust denier? It's a Gen Z guy,
Right.
right? Why? He just doesn't feel a reason that he should trust the authorities on
Right.
any of these things because they've lost legitimacy for him. So he's
Right.
open to ideas that I think previous generations would have been thought was crazy, but to him and his kind of mental framework for how the world works, it's yes, everything is conspiracy, everything's working against me. So many more things become viable intellectual options
Yeah.
um, for that group.
So then I could see why in the middle of that you would really gravitate towards something that is visceral, real, in your face, right in front of you. You can't deny it. You can't deny
Hmm.
the truth of Eastern Orthodoxy because it's there in front of you. And it's
Hmm.
like this it's a very visceral religion. Catholicism is a very visceral thing. Like evangelicalism is a much more spiritual. I shouldn't say spiritual, but um, much more kind of rationalistic at points. It's about you believing true things about God who has revealed it in his word,
Mm-hmm.
and you studying his word. And what's evangelical spirituality? It's Bible studies, quiet times, prayer, not prayer as in lighting candles and
Yeah.
rosaries. Those are all visceral, tactile things that you do, but rather just kind of, well, what the Bible says: go into your room quiet, alone, pray to your Father in secret. So if everything around you is a lie, um, I'm not shocked when people really start gravitating towards, like, I need something that I know is true right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really interesting that you connected the modern kind of charismatic uh, movement and those other movements, because it all is this kind of it's undeniably present. It's right in
Mm-hmm.
front of you. The real thing is right there.
Mm-hmm.
Versus evangelicalism, reform, like we've always believed that the real thing is here in a spiritual sense, but it's not really here, right? You have to trust the word of God. You have to
Mm-hmm.
trust who he is. You have to trust the promises that he's made.
Right.
But we live in this kind of, not by sight but by faith. Now I would argue, again, that's more in line with what the New Testament teaches
Right.
to expect. But I can
It's
totally see
yeah.
why guys who experience that would end up in that position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a hard sell. It's a really hard sell, I think, to stay. Because I have certain friends that are Roman Catholic where it's like, they're there because they engage very well intellectually with the arguments, right? They know they're Thomas Aquinas, they know they're,
Yeah,
they like there's a very intellectual, and those are the sorts of guys where it's like, we know behind the scenes that we do all of the ritual for the sake of the people, but we spiritual people, the ritual is kind of like a condensation to what the people need, right? They're weirdly Puritan in what they think is the ideal for worship. It's kind of interesting. I think for the masses of people kind of converting Catholicism through online stuff, it's not that deep. I saw a quote mine of church fathers that say, with the bolded points right out of context, and it's like, oh,
yeah.
Catholic, Ignatius said Eucharist and bishop and sacrifice. Oh, it must be Catholicism, right? Um, uh, and um,
As if no reformed or evangelicals
yeah,
have ever even heard of Ignatius.
Ignatius,
There's always this sense of,
yeah,
like, I discovered this and no one's ever seen this before.
right, yeah, exactly. And so I think for the majority, like you're right, the conversion is because they it's not because they've really thought about the arguments or really engaged intellectually. It's because I think they're actually tired of the intellectual aspect, right?
Hmm.
They just want to hold on to something, um, and physical and sensorial, right? And it's kind of a very like base form of religion. It's a religion of the passions, right? Have my passions, and my senses full, and that will guide my intellect, right?
Hmm.
Um, and and I think the sell of Protestantism is actually, hey, your passions lie, your passions
Yeah,
don't know what they're talking about, and actually the higher part of you is your intellect, it's your soul, and the
right.
soul must rule the body, and the nature of true religion, isn't external, isn't what you do with the body necessarily. And the body is subservient. There's the goodness of the body,
Right.
all those things. But if you think about like when Paul talks about, I think about this recently when he gives his exhortation to sing to one another, making a melody in your heart to the Lord,
Hmm.
right? And so for Paul, the seed of worship in singing, both times we talks about this in Colossians and Ephesians, it's in your heart is where the melody exists. In your
Hmm.
heart is where the worship happens, right? So you can mouth and you can still make the melody in your heart, right? Like the seed of worship,
Right.
the seed of connection to God isn't the external, it's the disposition of the heart. I delight, in repentance, I delight in a changed heart, not sacrifice,
Yeah.
right? And so saying that all these external things are in some sense a condensation to the needs of man, right?
Right.
Why do we have physical sacraments? If you listen to a lot of these liturgical renewal people, it's like, oh, because God wants to focus on like the goodness of the earth and the physical and all these things. And it's like, no, it's because you're weak. It's because your body, after the fall is not in the right sort of relationship with your soul. Your soul is
Right.
not the primary. You're not a spiritual person. You're still kind of a carnal person. So I'm condescending to you and instituting physical signs and seals to confirm to your weakness that these truths are true, right?
Mm.
And you want proof of that? Well, it's the fact that Israel was just more carnal than we are now in the old covenant, and so they had to have a multiplicity of signs. But the new covenant's superior because it's more spiritual, because it's less focused on the carnal and more on the spiritual, because there's been a greater outpouring of the Spirit. Um, but that's just a hard sell. That's a hard sell to us because of our weakness. We're
Yeah.
so weak. We want to grab onto things we can touch and we can smell. And I'm just repeating things you've said on this podcast before. Um, but that's why it's hard. It's very, very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is. It is hard. However, I also think that it, for instance, I think there's a lot made about people converting to Eastern Orthodoxy, people converting to Roman Catholic. I still think the numbers are actually relatively low,
Mm-hmm.
and most Gen Z kids who are going to church are going to non-denoms, as
Mm-hmm.
you've called them before, hot dog church.
Yep.
Not because it's like, oh, you get a hot dog there, but because it's everybody loves it, right?
Right.
That's the whole idea of
Yeah.
hot dog
That's
church.
like, yeah, it's my good friend Colin Radimer. Yeah.
Yeah. That they're all a lot of them are still going to these kind of just non-denom.
Mm-hmm.
They're not particularly doctrinally specific,
Mm-hmm.
but they're doctrinally sound.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not as sound as we would like them to be,
Right.
but on the, typically the evangelical, non-denom church doctrine list is Scripture, sin, Jesus, church, return of Christ.
So true.
Like that, and
Yeah.
and that's not all bad. I mean, that's actually not that's a pretty basic summary of kind of what you need to know as a Christian. And we would add a couple things here and there, but most of them are going to these churches that are still kind of with that, what you're saying, that kind of the focus on the soul and the heart. I like what you're saying about the body, because I think that is something that classic Protestantism and traditional Protestant worship can provide, which is the training of the body to appreciate what the soul and the training of the soul and the body to kind of connect, where you can actually want the real worship of God's people. I've heard people who became reformed, and they became like reformed like Psalm only,
Right.
and they said that it was really hard, but once they got used to it, it's what they began to love it, and it began. And so you can train the body to appreciate things that before. I mean, I grew up in kind of non megachurch world, and if you had shown me what I enjoy now for worship, and I'm definitely not trying to say that I'm further advanced or something, but I think it's more of an anxiety-induced, like, I need peace, and organ and hymn and congregational singing actually promotes peace in my heart and joy and this kind of lively sense of fun and joy in the Lord, that I think you can get in kind of traditional Protestant worship that it's hard to get in non-denom, because you're so bombarded with stuff that it's exhausting at times.
And I think it's this idea that, like, I want to say that the passions are good. Like, God gave us the passions. Right. He gave us love and anger and these sorts of things. But the passions are actually most useful when they have the governor of the intellect over them, and when the intellect trains the passions. And I think people have it reversed. They think, I'll be intellectually ultimately satisfied when my passions are met, instead of saying, I'm actually completely satisfied in my body when my intellect is met. And what I mean by this is that, humans by nature desire to know, and our souls thirst for God. right? Or
Mm.
not my body. My soul thirsts for God. My body thirsts to feel comfortable and feel happy and warm,
Right.
um, and all these things. But my soul thirsts for God, right? It thirsts for the truth. That's what it thirsts for, the vision of God. And
Right.
once you have that vision of God, right, and you train your passions towards that, and you subdue them and you moderate them, you actually kind of find that's where true vitality comes from in worship, right? Think about the people that you sit in a service and you pull out hymnals with a group of people that kind of get it, you
Mm.
know, and they open those hymnals and they sing and they sing because they know what they're singing. They
Yeah.
understand, the church is one foundation, is Jesus Christ our Lord. She is his
Yeah.
new creation, right? And you get this group just singing. There's sort of real vitality
Hmm.
rooted in a true thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're instead of kind of this opposite way, right? Where if I kind of from the passions to the intellect, you know.
Right.
Um, I kind of think that's what you're kind of talking about,
Yeah.
and why kind of those tried and true methods, when coupled with understanding, lead to, I think, an even more real vitality, like kind of the false carnality of the other options.
Right. Yeah. I think it also allows the it allows you to process your own history in a
Hmm.
way that's like um, integrated. I don't want to use too much psychology
Right.
kind of speak, but I think a lot of guys don't know what to when they come out of the evangelical non-dom world.
Hmm.
Um, they don't really know what to do with it. Like, was that real? Was that all emotion? Was that, and I look back and I'm like, my parents brought a old guitar book I had from my church growing up,
Hmm.
where I had a lot of the songs we would sing, and I was sitting there playing some of them. I just thought, like, these songs so moved me, and they still move me,
Hmm.
because, like you're saying, the passions were bad, and it was connected to a real thing. Now,
Hmm.
it wasn't something that was going to sustain me for the long. That's the other thing I think
Right.
that Protestantism has to offer, is a longevity of, like, no, we're in this for your whole life. That's
Hmm.
our goal, is to, the prayer book walks you from birth to baptism, to sickness, to death, marriage.
Hmm.
It's like we're here for a whole stop shop.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of the non-dom world, it's very fast,
Right.
and you can get caught up in it, and you can get kind of, and it's great. But I think what you're saying, that the soul is the primary thing,
Hmm.
and therefore what God was saying to me when I was a teenager, sneaking into Passion conferences to hear Chris Tomlin
Hmm.
sing "Holy is the Lord,"
Hmm.
is real.
Yeah.
God was really there doing that,
Hmm.
in the same way that
Yeah.
He's there now when we all sing uh, a psalm together in
Hmm.
worship, or we sing the doxology.
Right.
you know He's still there. And
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things that I find hard to imagine, going to, like, some of these other traditions where you have to kind of discount all. You have to say, no, he was never there. And it's
Right.
like, well, who was I talking to? What was my experience? And then you have to kind of de-Christianize everybody, where I think
Yeah.
with what you're saying, we can say, yeah, the people at Hot Dog Church, I don't hate them. I'm not out to get them. I think what they're doing, I don't want to do that, and
Right.
I think there's some things that I disagree with.
Hmm.
But God is really at work there.
Hmm.
And if a kid leaves my church to go to one of those churches, I could be like, God bless. Like, I hope it's good for you, and I hope God meets you there. Now, there's some churches I would caution them against, or
Right.
run poorly and stuff. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, I,
It,
I love how you're putting that.
it's funny because I feel like my poor wife has endured me going through a Michael W. Smith phase recently, right, in the car. And a lot of these songs that I grew up singing in church, um, I actually enjoy more now than I ever did then,
Yeah, yeah.
because you kind of, I think, understand the theology behind it. I made this tweet a few months ago, and it was like, I can't believe Thomas Cranmer stole the Collect for Purity from "Open the Eyes of My Heart, Lord." It's you have this theology baked in the best
Yeah,
of evangelicalism. So yeah, but
that's awesome. Well,
mm,
hey, I don't want to. I want to let you go. As before you go, is there
mm.
any? If you were to pick one collect or one part of the prayer book from
Oh
your
man,
time in Anglican, if you had a draft
yeah.
and the PCA, you were the GM for the PCA, and you could adopt one liturgical element from Anglican world,
Mm,
and you were the GM, and no one could say anything.
yeah.
What would it be?
Um,
You can't even modify it. You have to just
you just,
pick
you
it
just,
as
you
is.
just pick it as is. Uh, uh, that's a good. I can I say two?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
absolutely.
number one, the prayer of humble access, of course. You got to have that. And I actually first got introduced to it at a Presbyterian church. And I was disappointed when I joined tech for a bit, and I was like, we don't use the prayer of humble access in Right Two.
We do at ours.
Yeah, I know. Oh, y'all do. Okay, that's great.
Yeah. Right
Um,
one.
oh yeah, good because y'all use Right One. That's right. And then from the 1662, I love how do you pronounce it? The commentation service. The service for the day commonly called Ash Wednesday.
Yeah.
The sermon in there, and its prayer confession, I think are some of the best, like I think, encapsulations of the prayer book's theology of salvation, repentance, and we could read that throughout the year a bit.
It's
I
awesome.
like that. So
It's
probably those
awesome.
two. Yeah.
Well, you got anything you want to plug? Your Twitter handle?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at John MCK 1647, and that's JON. Um,
I'll link it in the show
yeah,
notes.
and then my Presbyterian friends out there, coming soon. Publishing dates TBA. I'll be publishing a revised edition of the Old Presbyterian Book of Common Worship with Davenant Press. So be on the lookout for that.
That's awesome.
You can find the Prayer of Humble Access in there. So
Good. Good.
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Okay, see you later.